Good evening, and you're all very welcome to this evening's webinar, which is being brought to you tonight by the Teagasc Mayo Advisory Staff. My name is Brendan Gary. I work in Teagasc and Ballinrobe, and tonight, for the next hour, I'm delighted to be your host for this webinar on this cold Thursday evening. Now, this evening's webinar is the second episode in a new 4-part series of webinars, which will run for 2 more weeks each Thursday night at 8 p.m, and the same link will work for each webinar. Now, during this new series, we will cover some of the key agricultural issues facing Irish farmers, and tonight will be no different. Now, tonight we will look at the various aspects of winter nutrition of beef animals, and we have 2 speakers who will discuss a range of issues tonight. Our first speaker tonight will be well-known dry stock advisor Alan Nolan from Teagasc and Ballinrobe, and Alan is going to talk to us about maximising performance of animals over the winter period. While later this evening, Aisling Claffey, the Teagasc Ruminant Nutritionist based in Teagasc and Grange, and Aisling is going to provide us with an overview of the main feed-related issues. Now, you, the viewers, are being encouraged to engage with our speakers here tonight. We ask you to type your questions into the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screens, phones or tablets. And later this evening, Vivian Silk, the Teagasc Regional Manager here in County Mayo, will put your questions live to both Aisling and Alan. So do type your questions into the Q&A throughout the evening. As always, this webinar is being recorded. It will be available to watch back on the Teagasc Mayo YouTube channel in the coming days, and we'll post the links also to Facebook and to Twitter and X. And indeed, at this stage of the evening, I'll now ask Alan Nolan there to start sharing your presentation with us. And it's over to you now, Alan.
Thanks, Brendan, and welcome to everybody there on the webinar this evening. As Brendan said, Alan Nolan is my name. I'm working here in Teagasc Ballinrobe, and I know it's about winter nutrition tonight, and Aisling will talk about the silage and the meal feeding later. But there's a few other factors there that I just want to talk to you about when talking about cattle performance over the winter months. So there's a number of things there that you have to look at, so that we do get cattle to perform over the winter and try and keep costs down. As we all know, it's an expensive time of the year to be maintaining cattle, and we want to have them performing well over that period. So a few little things there that I'm going to run down through is pen space, that they've enough pen space there, that they aren't stressed or overcrowded in their pens, that they have enough feeding space, that they've enough feeding spaces in particular when you're meal feeding, that they can all get in there and there isn't too much bullying going on. I'll touch on housing as well, in particular ventilation, and over the last number of weeks that was a big issue because we had a fine spell there for a while when cattle were going indoors and a very muggy type of weather. So just the importance there of good ventilation and fresh air. A health plan and talking to your vet when it comes to parasite control and vaccination. Now, I'm not going to touch on vaccination tonight, but just to say that it is important there. Suckler farmers were vaccinating already there under the beef scheme, the beef welfare scheme, this time around, and even in terms of suckler cows, in terms of doing scour vaccines and things like that, it's very important that you have that right. Clean fresh water that is available to stock at all times, and fresh feed, and the feed type and feed quality, which Aisling will go through. And then finally is just to monitor the performance, either by weighing the cattle. You could be looking at cattle there every day, but you need to know if they're performing. The only way you can do that is by weighing them and looking at the body condition of score of cows. So look at when it comes to pen space there, we're grouping animals according to their weight and their size. So if you have weanlings there, you're putting the lighter weanlings in together so they get a little bit of extra treatment, a little bit of extra meal. If you're finishing cattle, you're grouping them there as you may be finishing them, because what we don't want to be doing is mixing stock later on, 6 weeks down the road or 8 weeks down the road. That's causing stress to animals, which is going to hinder their performance as well. So we want to try and avoid that if we can. I'm just getting this laser on here a minute. These are the Department of Agriculture space allowances that you're recommended to have in terms of metres squared per head. So we're looking here at a suckler cow in a slatted shade, supposed to have 2.5 to 3 metres squared. And it's probably 3 metres squared in a lot of cases out there, because anyone that has big continental cows, they need that space allowance. Just looking down here at some of the lighter stocks in around the 300 mark in both of those categories, you can see it's about 1.5. So that's what your average 300 kilo weanling would need, at least a minimum of 1.5 metres per head. And your finishing cattle down here, you're looking at 2.2 to 2.7. So in a lot of cases, you're looking at that upper range there, the 2.7. So for a standard pen, which is 4.6 metres, a standard bay is probably 4.8, which is a 15-foot 9 bay. and just allowing 100 mils there either side for walls and gates and things, you have 4.6 by 4.2 is giving you this figure, which means the maximum number of weanlings you can hold in that pen is 12. But really and truly, you're allowing only 10 or 11 because we are allowing for hopefully weight gain over the winter. And the same with the cows there, a maximum of 7 cows. But if the cow size is large, you're looking at just the 6 there in that case. Feeding space too is every bit as important, that we can ensure that all animals can feed at the one time and that there's no bullying. So where you are, and most of you will be feeding meal out there, it's important that all the animals can feed at the one time. So just looking at a few of the figures here, we'll say this again is your suckler cows, your finishing cattle, and your weanlings over here. So in terms of ad-lib silage, these are the figures that you're looking at in terms of millimeters per head. But in terms of the concentrate, this is the more important line down along here. That's the type of figure that you are looking at here. And just one thing to point out here when it comes to suckler cows, the figure that's here is lower when it's ad-lib silage. That's when silage is available 24/7 for the cows. But if it's restricted at all, you need a much bigger allowance there. So for any suckler farmers out there that might have cows in good condition and you're restricting them silage, you need to be very careful that they have enough feed space, because there will be a bit of bullying, a bit of barging going on when the silage does reappear again. And that's what you don't want. You don't want to be having abortions or things like that then happening. So your standard bay again, 4.6 divided by 450 mils. And what I've done there is I've taken the average here between the 400 and the 500, and it's 10 weanlings. So again, if you have lighter weanlings, you might fit an extra one in. If you have heavier weanlings, you might only fit 9 of them in there that they can feed comfortably there at the front. So allow for weight gain then for both pen space and feeding space. So for example, if you've feeding bullocks and you have 8 bullocks, 700 kilos or 650 kilos going into the shed, they could put on 100 kilos there. So that 8 bullocks by 100 kilos, it's an extra 800 kilos there at the end of the finishing period. So you need to have that right. And the feed barrier, have it at the correct height so that you don't restrict access and intake, which is going to affect the performance. So if you see the hair at the back of their neck being cut off, you know that the barrier is not at the right height. Just quickly looking at body condition score of cows and maybe why it's important. I'm just touching over a few things here tonight that you need to be looking at. Most of you will know about this, that it's a system to measure body fat. It's on a scale of 0 to 5. So basically 0 is when the cow is extremely thin. In fact, she's nearly dead at that stage, like she's that thin. Whereas 5 is grossly over fat. So it's on that scale that you're looking at. It's measured in 3 areas on the cow. Basically the tail head, the ribs, or the loin area, or the lumbar area, some people might call it. And what you don't want the cows to be over thin or over fat. You'd like them to be in that 2.5 to 3.5, that kind of a range. And why is it important? Like body condition score, it affects cow fertility and cow reproduction. So if your cow is too thin and she's under pressure, she's going to be slower coming cycling again. So that's going to affect the fertility. And the one thing all suckler farmers want, or what we should be doing, is trying to achieve a cow per calf per year. So that'll come under pressure. The milk yield will come under pressure. The health, her own health, the health of the calf will be under pressure. And then if you're at the other extreme, if you have body condition score of 4, you can run into calving difficulty, which again can affect the reproduction. So you should body condition score all your cows and heifers at housing. I know a lot of farmers will do it, and they'll do it visually and look at the cows and the heifers, but you should put them up the crush or just put a hand on them at the tail head along the ribs there, and you'll get a better idea. And then pen. It's important then to pen according to this body condition score. Pen the first and second calves separately anyways, because they need a little bit of extra treatment. They're still growing. And then pen the 10 ones, the fat cows and the cows in correct condition separately. Now, I know a lot of farmers out there might have only 10 to 12 cows, but even in that case, put them into 2 pens. Your cows that are thinner and need a bit more attention, and the cows then that are in better condition, and feed accordingly. This is just a visual there of 4 different body condition scores. So just taking this black cow up here at the top left firstly. So what you're looking at, the 3 areas that I said there, is it's at the tail head. So you're just pinching that fat there. You're just squeezing between your 2 fingers here at this area. You can just about see down along here, but the ribs, you rub your hand along the ribs here, and then you're taking this loin area up here, or lumbar area. So you can see that this cow is thin here. She's only a body condition score at 2. So she's too thin really coming in. She's going to be under a lot of pressure over the winter and she'll need a lot of feeding, and that's going to add to your cost over the winter. So that's why we don't want cows coming into the winter in poor condition. Moving over here, you have body condition score 3. You can see that there's a good bit more fat here around this cow, around the tail head here. But it's a lot more ideal to have a cow coming in that type of condition. As we move down along, body condition score 3, again, you can see the fat level there, quite an amount between the 2 fingers. So this cow here is kind of ideal if she's a spring calver coming in the autumn. She can afford to lose a bit of condition without affecting the calving or the reproduction later. And this cow here, this 4th one down here, is a lot fatter now. As you can see, there's a body condition score 4. A lot more fat there between the two fingers, and you can even see it down along her back as well. So she's probably in too good a condition coming in, and would need to be restricted somewhat on the silage, but over a period of time. It's not something that you do in the last few weeks before calving. You do it on a more gradual basis over 2 or 3 months. Just touching on ventilation as well as one of the issues that we need to look. And as I said there earlier, it became a big issue for all farmers there, whether you're Suckler with Weanlings going in or whether you're finishing cattle and having cattle indoors. We had muggy enough weather there in the calm weather for a few weeks, and cattle would have been like steaming enough in the shade, to put it that way. So like, what is ventilation and what do we want it to do? Is to supply fresh air into the shade. That's the biggest thing we wanted to do. And also to remove any of these gases, odors, and dust, and also this bacteria that might be circulating and moving around in the shade, and remove the heat and the moisture that the animals produce. So the air that the animal is basically breathing out, we want to move that out of the shade. And the signs of poor ventilation, you'd be aware of them there when you go into a shed and there's drips on the roof, or there's wet bedding in creep areas, cobwebs and dust in the roof. There's maybe you walk into a shed and you get a bad smell straight away, this bad odour, especially in a shed that might be feeding a high level of meal, or it might have a low roof. Some of those older slatted sheds with a low roof, you just get that smell. It hits you in the face straight away when you walk in. Or the cattle themselves can have wet coats or dirty hides on the cattle, and can result in poor thrive. And ultimately then what that leads to is some of these respiratory problems that we want to avoid, with ammonia building up in cattle. So that's what we don't want. So really what I'm saying to you there is, if your shed was stuffy last year and there was problems with it, the chances are it'll be the same again this year. So you need to take action, or try to take some measures that will help. So most of the sheds in Ireland, or the slatted sheds, are on this theory of this stack effect. You hear it. So really it works on the principle the same as maybe any that have an open fire at home. The way the smoke is drawn up the chimney, or in this case here, the hot air rises, because hot air is lighter than the cool air. So this is what the cattle are breathing, and it rises up. It needs to exit here, and then you have cooler air sucked in at the sides here, usually at the eave height. Okay, so that's the fresh air coming in that the cattle need above here, and it's driving out all this dust, bacteria, moisture, and everything that the cattle produce. The problems that may arise sometimes is if this inlet isn't adequate enough, here either side there's not enough cold air getting in, or this outlet isn't either big enough, or it's blocked or restricted, and the hot air isn't getting out and it's circulating here around the top of the shed. Or you might have a situation where a shed is added on to this shed here and it blocks the airflow getting into this new shed. Or even out here, you might have had a hedge or trees that were small at one stage and have now grown up, and they're affecting the air circulating, getting in here. So there are some of the issues that might arise. Just looking at these things, these are just department figures down here at the bottom. So the X signifies here the inlet and the outlet. That sheds up to 15 meters wide, they have to have an inlet here of that minimum 450 millimeters at either end, and an exit here as well too, or an outlet. But as the sheds get wider, these openings need to get bigger, okay, on both sides. Now what this Y represents here is the canopy, which I haven't drawn in here, but as you all know, over the outlet there's usually a canopy, and in some cases this canopy is too close down to the opening. So there is a minimum height that the canopy has to be above it in grand spec sheds, and that's what them figures represent there. So look at those figures will be available if you need to get them again, but it's something that you need to look at, is the ventilation in your shed. Very quickly, I have a few visual of sheds here that I would have seen over the years, and just little repairs or jobs that farmers have done to try and improve the situation. So what we have there is this is a shed in North Mayo where the farmer lifted the sheeting here, as you can see, all along the roof, because basically he was finding that he was having pneumonia problems in the shed, and this would have increased his outlet area, so the hot air was able to get out quicker, and even the lower end of the shed here, it would have acted as an inlet as well too. And you can see he took down some of the vintage sheeting here on the side, and that would have increased the inlet and the air getting in here at the side under the eave. Now, the prevailing wind and rain is coming from the other side, so he was quite happy here that there wasn't much wind or rain getting in here on a creep area. So that's one example of what one farmer did. This picture here down in the bottom left was taken actually in Grange, which is a hay shed type shed or a curved roof. And what they did is it was converted into a calving shed, and they lifted the sheet here, as you can see. And what the department again would recommend if you're using one of those sheds is that 2 sheets per bay is lifted, these curved sheets. Okay, so that's again another example of just increasing the outlet area. But when I'm talking about all these things here, be very careful from a health and safety point of view. Going up climbing on roofs is a dangerous job, so make sure you get somebody to do it that knows what they're doing and can do it safely. This is the same shed here, built near close to Ballinrobe a few years ago. But what you can see is instead of the vintage sheeting going the whole way to the roof, which it used to do, there's a clear opening left under the eave gutter here. And certain sheds now of a certain width have to have that now, where they have to have a 300 mil opening in some of these grand spec sheds. So it's just allowing more air to get in there. And even though this is the picture here is a bit dark, it's the same shed. It's shown here that there's an overhang in the roof coming out a good bit further, which stops any of the wind and rain getting in. So it's just allowing the air getting in without any wind and rain. And just the two on the right here, just where vintage sheeting was taken down and space boarding was put up. Okay, so again, allowing more air in, and the Yorkshire boarding can be put up as well. And this was another farmer here not far from Ballinrobe. As you can see, they had vintage sheeting up, but he felt that there wasn't enough air getting into the shed. So he took them down, put them back up again, but left a space between the vintage sheeting. Now, he probably left wide enough here because, again, it's not facing the prevailing wind. It is recommended that that's only about 1 inch when it is being done that way. So look, they're just examples of modifications that you can make. I'm sure a lot of you looking in here this evening, you could have done, maybe there's different modifications you could have done, but talk to your advisor or talk to your vet if need be. Just another little tip here that's always practical at this time of year is just clipping the cattle. It just removes that excess here where lice survive. You should do it soon enough after housing because it's easier to do it. Basically, that's why, because once cattle are in for a while, they get wetter, damper, dirtier, and it's a harder job to do. And it makes it easier to apply pour-on product, and you get a better uptake of the product as well. And it reduces the sweating in the shed. It'll keep the cattle, the body temperature cooler, which is what we want. So it helps reduce ammonia and increases the feed intake, and you get better performance. So you can see it there in the pictures. And actually this picture here is one of the farmers in the Future Beef programme. He's Shane and Oliver O'Hara from County Leitrim, and they had a video there that's up on Teagasc YouTube, which shows what they do in terms of clipping cattle when they go into the shed at winter. So just quickly to run through from a health point of view, like this is just a quick run through it. Really the big message here is talk to your vet. You have to talk to your vet and stay in touch in terms of dealing with all these issues. But you nearly know what the big issues are. It's your lungworms. And I know myself from being on farms this autumn, there was that husky cough out there on farms. So there was an issue with lungworms. We've had 2 wet enough summers. So you know that husky cough when it comes there. And if you have lungworm, you're going to have irritation. And if it gets bad, there would be damage in lungs. And if that happens, you're leaving, in particular, Weanling's younger stock vulnerable then to pneumonia. As animals get older, they do develop immunity to lungworm, but not in the younger stock. Your stomach worms then need to be treated, including this inhibited larva, the stage 2 there. You just need to be careful there that some of the yellow drenches don't work in that. So again, it's important to ask the vet when you're buying whatever product you're buying, what it covers. And just be careful there. There is an issue with resistance now to a good few of the wormers for the stomach worm. So again, it's something to be watching out. Your liver fluke, which I'll just touch on again in a minute, huge issue in this part of the world. Your external parasites, your lice and your mange, and then your liver fluke, which I have a question mark about because for a lot of farms, 8 to 9 farms out of 10, it's not a big issue, but there might be 1 to 2 farms there in every 10 that have an issue with rumen fluke where they're having poor thrive. They may be kind of scouring Weanlings and stuff like that. So you might be as well to do a fecal test and talk to your vet if it is an issue. Because we have only one product that deals with rumen fluke. So again, because of resistance, we don't want to be overusing that. Why do we dose at housing? It's very simple. It's our chance to clean out the animals. Look, at worms and liver fluke, they survive poorly or don't really survive in silage and slurry. So if you've cattle indoors and they're eating silage and you dose them, they're not getting reinfected. Whereas outside on grass, they can be picking up infection again. And even if you dose them there and there's some resistant worms, those resistant worms, when they're shed back out into the slurry, they won't survive in the slurry. So it gives us a chance there to kind of clean the animals out, and that they're animals that won't be a source of infection for pasture next year. And as I said at the very outset, housing is an expensive time, so animals need to be performing there. We're spending a lot of money on making expensive silage, spending a lot of money on spending meal. So we don't want animals there underperforming, or even in some cases standing still and not performing at all, because there's an underlying health issue there. So that's why we're doing it. Just in terms of liver fluke, Animal Health Ireland had a report out there very recently that there was an increase in liver fluke due to the wet summers there in 23 and 24. So be very mindful of that. The main symptoms of liver fluke is lack of thrive in your finishing cattle or your weanlings again in stores, loss of body condition, and maybe in your suckler cows, fertility issues. There is no immunity to liver fluke, unlike, say, the lungworms. So all animals need to be treated. And when you're looking at it there, the flukicides themselves, without getting into them in much detail, they're grouped into 3 types. You've got your adult-only flukicides, right? So they ideally should only be given about 10 to 12 weeks after housing. The likes of your albendazole there, which would be the likes of Albex, oxyclosanil, which is your Levofast Diamond, and your Zanil, which is the one that kills the rumen fluke. So that's the one we don't want to be overused. So they're ideally shouldn't be given till 10 to 12 weeks after housing. Then you have your late juvenile to adult flukicides, the likes of your closamectin and your Trodax is in this bracket here. Okay, and then you have your all stages flukicides, your triclobendazoles here. So the likes of your Fasinix and your Tribex. But the problem with these ones here is that there has been a resistance issue with some of these. So again, it's important to talk to your vet, know what you're dosing for, and know what stage or stages of fluke that you're actually killing with the product that you are using. In some cases, it may require 2 doses, depending on what you're doing, and you may need to treat younger stock different to cows. With your cows, you may wait, but with your younger stock, you might want to dose them 2 to 3 weeks after going in, because you don't want to have them in there a long time not thriving. And just finally on that one there for farmers killing cattle, be very careful of the withdrawal dates. There can be quite big withdrawal dates on some of those, so that's something else to factor in. Just in terms of lice, there's 2 types there, your biting lice and your sucking lice. I won't spend too long on it here, but they're sprayed by close contact at housing. So look at basically the housing conditions suit them because their cattle are in close proximity. They have humid conditions, less UV light. So when you are doing it, have all animals housed and treat all animals on the one day. And don't introduce new or untreated animals to the shed. So basically, if you have a 3-bay double shed and you treat 5 pens out of it, there's no point doing it if you leave 1 pen untreated. It'll just spread again. So you have both injectable and pour-on products. Now, none of the products kill the eggs, so you may have to treat again in 3 to 4 weeks if you have a very bad case of it. So look at Brendan, I'm going to finish up fairly soon. I think the last message that I'm going to get out there is that it's very important to monitor the performance. We can be looking at all these things here, but you need to monitor. As I said, you can go in, you can look at cattle every day, you can be out feeding them twice a day, but it's very hard to have a trained eye to know whether they're thriving or whether they're putting on good weight. The only way to know it is by weighing. Okay, so farmers have got used to weighing for the skep, but we should be weighing to monitor the performance over the winter. So ideally what you do is weigh maybe 1 week post-housing. Just give cattle kind of a week to settle in, then weigh them. Maybe weigh them again at the start of the new year, around the Christmas period. Maybe you might have help home around the Christmas and weigh them at that stage, see how things are going and if there's issues that need to be corrected. And again, before going to grass in the springtime, so that you know your full performance over winter. If it wasn't up to target, well, it's something you can correct for next year. Okay, so you can find out what the issue is. Is it a health issue, a feed issue, or an environment issue, which I mean could be the likes of the ventilation. And it's also helpful to know there what amount of dose to administer. As I mentioned earlier, there can be issues there with resistance, and a lot of that can be to do with underdosing because farmers aren't using the correct amount of dose because they don't know the weight of the cattle. And a lot of farmers had scales prior to this, but now there's an even greater incentive there in that the cattle scales, there is a grant aid there now at the minute under the Farm Safety Scheme at 60%. So in summary, Brendan, we should try and reduce stress at housing. We don't want stress on housing for cattle to perform. You need adequate pen and feeding space, need a healthy environment, a well-ventilated shed, as you can see here. That's actually a new shed up in the Newford farm in the new site that they have in Roscommon, well-ventilated shed. Talk to your vet, have a health plan in place for control of parasites this winter. Good nutrition, which Aisling is going to talk to you about, and then monitor your performance. And I'll leave it at that, Brendan, and I'm happy to answer any questions later on.
That's great, Alan. Thank you very much there for that very comprehensive presentation there this evening. At this stage of the evening, look, what I just encourage again our listeners and viewers there this evening. We have a lot of farmers on, well over 115 farmers on this evening. So do put your questions in there to the Q&A, and Vivian will pick them up in after Aisling's presentation. So at this stage of the evening, I'd like to introduce our Teagasc Ruminant Nutrition Specialist, Aisling Claffey. Aisling is based in Teagasc and Grange and is going to talk to us now on a range of feed-related issues. So over to you now, Aisling.
Thanks very much, Brendan, and thanks very much for Daria for having me on this evening. I'm going to go through the importance of forage analysis, the management of house stock, and look, Alan covered that in a lot more detail. What we should be considering when we're buying our concentrate feeds this winter, and then a little bit on our weighing requirements, the requirements for finishing cattle, and the requirements for the suckler cow as well. So in terms of forage analysis, we really need to know what we're working with in terms of the quality of the feed we have. High quality forage will underpin really profitable systems, and silage quality will determine our animal intake potential this winter, the amount of concentrate requirement for our cattle, depending on the targets we are trying to achieve. It'll have a role to play in our daily feed costs. The higher quality forage we have, the more we can do from forage in terms of our average daily gain over the winter months, and it'll underpin animal performance. So I suppose if we go about testing silage, what are we actually looking at when that forage analysis comes back? And I suppose most people will be familiar with that DMD value, and I'm just going to get out my pointer now as well. Here, that's 75 DMD silage that we can see in this sample, and maybe the crude protein, but there's a lot more information as well that feeds into it. And obviously the quality is a key factor, but I suppose for me, we also want to look at some of the preservation characteristics, because that will also support intake as well. So we can see here this silage is 21% dry matter, so it is a slightly wetter silage, pH of 4.35, and we've ammonia of just over 5. So that's quite good for most of those values. And I suppose another aspect I would also look at then is down the bottom here in terms of our lactic acid and our VFAs. So we want, when we put our silage in a clamp, we want those lactobacillus bacteria to feed on the sugars in the grass and produce lactic acid. And that's what drops the pH and preserves our silage. And that lactic acid produces really palatable, good quality silage. And what happens if we have poor preservation is that VFA content is higher. So ideally we want our lactic acid percentage to be about 4 times higher than our VFA. So that's really good quality silage. So this is a fairly good example here. So the lactic acid is about 3 times higher than the VFA content. If we look at this next sample then, so this is a slightly poorer quality sample here, you can see 67 DMD, and we have a considerable drop off in crude protein. And we also have a considerable increase then in the fibre content of that silage. So our last sample was only 46% fibre, this is 53%. And we can see here, this sample is very similar in terms of the dry matter, but our pH is much higher in this scenario. And ideally, the lower the dry matter of our silage, the lower the pH we want. We could cope with a 4.5, 4.6 pH if we had maybe 35% dry matter silage, so really dry forage. But with our silage, we want that pH a lot closer to 4. And you can see then, as we come down to the bottom, in terms of that VFA content, it's twice our lactic acid in this scenario. So we're all kind of familiar with that, maybe that rank smelling silage that kind of would stay in your hands nearly all day after handling it. That's your butyric acid, so it's not pleasant to even look at or handle, and so that's not going to support high levels of intake as well. So it's not going to be as palatable, and our cattle aren't going to be as eager to eat. So that's something to be conscious of as well. Another thing that you can also see in this sample is that our ammonia levels are up at 13.6. So there's been a breakdown of protein within that clamp as well. So that's just something else to be conscious of. And I suppose then that lower DMD silage with the higher fibre content, I suppose the real consequence to that is that it's going to have a slower passage rate in the rumen. So it's physically going to limit the intake potential of those animals. And I suppose when we have lower quality silage, it automatically limits energy intake as well. So if we look at this group of cattle, if they were getting 75 DMD silage and eating 6 kilos of it, they could do 0.6 over the winter months there with no meal. So if we have those cattle housed from the 1st of November and we're turning them out on the 1st of March, they should have done about 70 kilos. If we took the same group of cattle and had them on 67 DMD silage and still eating that 6 kilos ahead, they'll only do 0.4. So they're going to be about 24 kilos lighter leaving the shed from the same period. But actually, in reality, they're probably going to have ate less silage. That higher fibre content, lower energy, could actually potentially reduce their intake back to 5 kilos. So their average daily gain is actually going to suffer more. So they might only put on half of what those cattle on the good quality silage will have done without meal. So it's something to be really conscious of. They could need 2 kilos to make up the difference there. So it becomes a lot more costly to keep those cattle thriving over the winter. I suppose in terms of management of our house stock, I'll skim over this now because Alan has covered it in a lot more detail. But I suppose this time of year, we want appropriate lighting in our sheds for herding stock. A lot of farmers will be working off farm as well. So you're looking at those cattle early in the morning or late in the evening again. So we haven't got much light. So if you haven't got appropriate lighting in your shed, try get some handy LED lights that you might have better lighting even if you haven't got power source, and you might get to use solar to keep lights in your shed. Have your herd health plan in place. Access to clean water is critical over the winter months, and feed space and stock and density of sheds as well to maintain optimal performance. And Alan has covered that in a lot of detail, in fairness. And then good feed management. So we want to avoid feeding visible molds on our forages. We want to be taken away if we open up a bale and there's visible mold. We want to be pulling that material away. We want to allocate enough feed, and we want to keep meal and forage fresh. So particularly if we've got poorly preserved silage, put out enough and then keep it pulled away then if cattle aren't eating it, because over time it's going to start heating and it's going to be less palatable to animals. And the last thing we want to do is limit intake further. And then I suppose we have to be conscious of balancing protein and minerals, particularly if we're using straights over the winter months. In terms of buying concentrate feeds then, so what are we actually looking for when we're going into the merchant or local co-op to purchase a feed? I suppose really for me what underpins it is the energy content. And for that, you're looking at the UFL for your Weanling cattle or store cattle, or for your finishing cattle, you're looking at the UFE value. So that's the net energy of your ration, and that really is what will allow you to compare two different products either within a range or across different suppliers. The other thing we can look for is to see the label of the concentrate feed we're looking at, and we can look at the descending order of the ingredients, and that will give us the proportion that they're in. So the first ingredient on the label will be in at the highest proportion, and then it will descend accordingly. And I suppose it's also something to be conscious of is that we maybe ask about the proportion of the top 3 ingredients, and I'll discuss that now in a bit more detail in a few minutes to explain my thinking on that. But I suppose when we're comparing the quality of the ingredients to begin with, ideally we want a ration that's built on high energy ingredients. So from our energy sources, we're looking at our cereals like maize. Maize is the highest energy feed. And it's also the most slowly digestible of the cereals, so it's the safest of them from a rumen health point of view. And then barley would be the next best alternative. Wheat is particularly rapidly digestible in the rumen, so I suppose particularly where we're looking at higher feeding rates, we have to be conscious of the level of wheat we're including in the diet. And then beet and citrus pulp are quite good energy sources as well. And beet is a good source of digestible fibre. So that'll help support rumen health too, especially in higher feeding scenarios. And then in terms of our protein sources, the likes of our soybean and maize distillers and beans and peas would be very high energy content for protein sources. Now I suppose soybean be probably particularly dear, so maize distillers and beans and peas would probably be much better value, particularly for the likes of our finishing diets where the overall protein content isn't as important. And for most situations we're really looking at a balanced diet for protein as opposed to being really hung up on the overall protein source. In terms of our moderate energy ingredients then, the likes of our oats and soya hulls are quite good sources of energy as well from that point of view, and they'd have a bit more digestible fibre within them as well. And then from a protein point of view, the likes of our rapeseed meal, maize gluten and wheat distillers. And then I suppose in terms of the lower energy ingredients, and these are the things we kind of want to avoid in our rations, or we want to be sure that they're in very minimal inclusion levels. So the likes of our wheat feed or pollard, as it might be more traditionally known. And then in terms of protein sources, the likes of palm kernel and sunflower. So that's something we need to be conscious of. If we have a high proportion of those feeds going in, they're really diluting the overall energy value of our rations. So I'm just going to go through two rations here. And I suppose if we were to look at these two labels on a bag, with no percentages beside them, they would actually read quite similarly to most people. So if we look at the first one here, it's barley, maize, and maize distillers as the first three ingredients, and opposite side, maize, barley, maize distillers. So if we were to look at that, we think they were very similar. But if we look at the first ration, it's 20% barley, 18 maize, and 15 distillers. So the top three ingredients are making up only 53% of that ration. And then we have soya hulls coming in at 14%, wheat feed at nearly 14% as well, maize gluten at 10%, and palm kernel at 5%, and then your molasses and minerals. So that's something to be conscious of, that the lower the inclusion of the top few ingredients means that the ingredients that are coming in behind them are still in at quite a high level. And I suppose you could manipulate a label very easily. If you look at the hulls and wheat feed there beside each other, they're nearly in as identical amounts to the maize distillers in that scenario, so 15, 14 and 13.8. So that's something to be very much conscious of, and that's why we'd look to get the overall UFE of that ration. So that's a 14% crude protein, but it's 0.19 or 0.91 UFE, sorry. Then if we look at the second ration, in this scenario, we have 30% maize, 25% barley, and 15% distillers. So straight away, a much higher proportion of the ration has been made up from those top three ingredients. So we're up at 70%. So automatically, the rest of the ingredients are going to be in at much lower inclusion levels. So in this scenario, then we have hulls in at 10%, maize gluten at 5.8, wheat feed at 5, and palm kernel at 5, and then 4% molasses and 2% minerals. So that's a 13% crude protein ration, and it's in at 0.95 UFE. So while it seems like a small difference in the UFE content, it's worth paying an extra €10 a tonne for that ration. So that's something to be very conscious of when we're going out and spending money, particularly when you're looking at maybe finishing diets where you're at higher concentrate feeding levels and you're going to be buying a considerable amount of feed over the winter months. So then in terms of getting on to our Weanling requirements, I suppose we have to going back to our forage analysis and the overall quality that's going to dictate a lot of what we need in terms of feeding our weanlings to maintain a minimum level of performance over the winter months. And it'll also be a driver of protein availability within that forage, and that'll dictate as well what we need to be buying. We also need to consider forage source, and it mightn't be as much of an issue in the west of Ireland in terms of whole crops and maize silages, but if you are using alternative feeds or you have access to the likes of fodder beet and a finishing diet, or you're feeding it to weanlings, that you're balancing the protein level and mineral inclusion in those scenarios. In terms of weanlings then, if we look at the supplement required at different DMD silages, so if we have 75 DMD silage, those cattle don't need any meal over the winter months. They're going to achieve optimum level of performance at 0.6 kilos of average daily gain over the winter months. If we're back close to that 70 DMD silage, we can get away with just a kilo of concentrate in that scenario, as long as it's well preserved and good palatable silage that's going to support high levels of intake. And if we've good levels of crude protein in that silage, like 15% silage, so really good quality silage, we could actually get away with straight hulls or straight barley in that scenario, because we just need a little extra energy to boost performance. However, if we go back to poor quality silage, 65 DMD, we need 2.5 kilos concentrate now to maintain that 0.5 or 0.6. And that's kind of a minimum target we should be trying to achieve in terms of overall winter performance. And then if we're back to that 60 DMD silage, we'd be needing close to 4 kilos concentrate in that scenario. So that's something to be very conscious of, that that will dictate the overall amount of feed we need. And those lower quality silages as well, we're going to need 16-17% of a crude protein nut to balance overall protein in that diet. So we need to maintain that base level performance of 0.5 or 0.6. I suppose in a lot of cases our weanlings are stagnant over the winter months. And if we look at overall silage quality coming back from the labs, like we're sitting somewhere around 67, 68 DMD on average. So that's only sufficient to maintain dry cows, and it's not going to maintain performance in younger stock or growing animals. So if we're not testing that silage and not getting that information to work with on farms, we can see cattle going into the sheds and doing nothing over the winter months. And that's a lot of time lost, particularly if those cattle are in for 4 or 5 months of the year. It's a lot of time taken off their tribe, and it's going to have a significant impact on age of slaughter on the other side. If we have weaning cattle then for selling on maybe next spring, I suppose there's a cost benefit there potentially for achieving higher gain during this period. So we could be looking at maybe upping the meal to try get that performance level up to 0.7 or 0.8 if we've good quality weanlings for selling on next spring. And I suppose if we could get those out to grass for 2 or 3 weeks to clean them up after housing and have them well presented for sales then into March. But for our growing cattle then, we're aiming for 14 to 15% crude protein in a total diet. So that includes our store cattle as well, because they still have a considerable bit of frame growth before they go into that finishing scenario. Then in terms of our finishing cattle requirements, so like if we have really good quality silage, there's opportunities there to exploit forage-based finishing. So really 75 DMD silage is essential in this scenario. But if we have that sort of silage available to us in the yard and plenty of it, we could achieve an average daily gain of 1 kilo with cattle on 5 kilos a meal for steer cattle and close to 3.5 kilos concentrate for heifers, and maybe up in that to 6.5, 7 kilos for young bulls. I suppose if we've poor quality silage, for every drop, 1 unit drop in DMD, it takes an extra 0.3 kilos of concentrate. So if we go back from 75 DMD to 70 DMD, we're going to need another 1.5 kilos in that scenario. So for those steer cattle, you'd be up at 6.5 kilos. If we've 65 DMD silage, now you're up at 8 kilos. So really, if we have poor quality silage, we're getting very close to a high input system. Or if there's a forage deficit on farm, it might be worth considering as well. So I suppose we might discuss a little bit on the suitability for ad-lib feeding as well, if we're starting to merge into that system. I suppose if we're looking at that intensive finishing period, appropriate adaptation is critical. So we're really looking at building cattle up over 3 to 4 weeks. So we're starting on 2 to 3 kilos with their initial feed. Once we get up to 5 kilos, we're going splitting that then morning and evening. And then once we get up to 10 kilos then, and that could probably take close to 21 days, we're upping gradually by 1 kilo every 2 to 3 days and keeping a good eye on cattle and how they're coping with that adaptation as well. And then once we get up to that 10 kilos, we need to keep that meal constantly in front of them, and a minimum level of forage then of about 10% of their total intake. And really important in that scenario that we're keeping that forage source fresh as well, because we want those cattle accessing that fibre to keep overall ruminant health right. Clean water and constant supply of it is very critical in this scenario as well. But I suppose we have to be conscious of the suitability of stock for that intensive or high level of ad-lib finishing. So really the most suitable stock are higher growth potentials, so young bulls in particular, and our continental breeds. And steers would be more suitable than heifers as well. I suppose we have to also be conscious that we're putting cattle, appropriate cattle into that system. So if we're going housing our stock, that we go through them properly and say, right, pull out the cattle that are closest to finishing, because really they need to be within maybe 80 to 100 kilos of finishing to go into that scenario. Whereas if we have store cattle and we put them onto that diet as well, over time their performance will be reduced. So we're putting them into it too early. So we need to get them up to the growth potential first before we adapt them onto that ad-lib feeding. So it's really important that when we're grouping our stock going into the sheds, that they're grouped accordingly, and that'll make drafting out easier as well over the winter period, that we're able to pull out cattle that are fit for the factory as well in time. Because if we're going down that high cost scenario, an extra week or two in the system, if it's not necessary, gets very costly. So then in terms of our suckler cow requirements, so the majority of our cows would probably be calving next spring. So we need to be looking at pre-calver minerals for the last 6 weeks prior to calving. So if you're calving from mid-February, really, we're looking at introducing that then in early January. Ideally, it should be dusted on silage twice daily, and that'll be particularly important depending on feed space. So if you ad-lib silage and it's hard to get all cattle fed at the same time, that those cows will get access to minerals twice daily, that to ensure all animals get a supply of it. I suppose our dusted minerals provide magnesium, phosphorus, and they also supply our trace elements and vitamin D in particular, but they supply a variety of the vitamins. And we're looking at 100 to 120 grams per cow per day of our pre-calf mineral. In terms of then actually housing those cows' body condition score, and Alan touched on this briefly as well, it's a very important factor. So if we've really good conditioned animals coming into the shed, 66 DMD silage is more than optimal for those animals. But I suppose we do have to be conscious of the thin cows within that, our first calvers in particular, and second calvers as well if they're a bit light. And if we have animals that are scanned for twin pregnancies, so they need to be on either a very good quality silage, or if we haven't got good quality silage in the yard, we have to be considering giving them a bit of extra feed in the run up to calving. If we have 70 DMD silage or greater, we need to be conscious that those really high condition cows that we're potentially restricting silage in that scenario to avoid them getting over fat on us and creating issues around harder calving then for them. Then in terms of our freshly calved cow requirements, we need high quality silage, particularly from 3 weeks post calving when that calf is well fit to take in a high volume of milk, and we need to support milk supply. For our first calvers, we need to get that high quality silage in immediately after calving to support them. We don't want them losing a lot of condition in those early stages. And I suppose we have to be conscious that if silage quality is poor, that those cows need to be supplemented immediately after calving as well to make up for that. So in summary, I really strongly recommend getting your silage analysed this winter to ensure your stocks stay on track over the winter months. Winter feeding is costly, so you need to ensure that you're getting quality and value from your concentrate feeds, and that you're appropriately feeding animals based on your forage results. And I suppose good animal health is key to getting the best return from our nutrition, so we need to get that aspect right as well. So that's it for me, and thanks very much, and I'll take any questions as well.
Thank you very much, Aisling. That's a brilliant presentation there. So I'll just get you just to stop sharing your presentation. And indeed, the Q&A there is really hotting up there the last few minutes. So indeed, keep putting those questions in there. At this stage of the evening, I'd like to bring our speakers on board again. Vivian Silk here, our regional manager, is going to put the question that you've typed in there this evening to both Alan and Aisling. So over to you now, Vivian. Good evening, Vivian.
Thanks, Brendan. Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining our second webinar for this winter. Aisling, I'll let you catch your breath there for a minute. I'll give the first couple of questions to Alan, if that's okay. So, Alan, just questions after coming in there. Will leaving doors open help with ventilation in the cattle shed in periods of warm weather, I suppose, like we had until the last couple of days?
Look, it might help a small little bit there, Vivian. I suppose the biggest thing to be careful there is leaving doors open in a creep area if you have calves there or young stock, because while we're trying to get fresh air in, we don't want ground drafts. So that's something to be careful of. But with older stock, it'll probably help all right in the passage there. What some farmers have done before is they put big bales of straw along the creep area and maybe sometimes open the doors, and in that way at least they're avoiding the ground draft. But the price of straw this year, Vivian, I don't know, will there be people be using it for that purpose too much?
Yeah, they'll be wondering, all right. Yeah, thanks, Alan, for that. Just another one, Alan. It came in there just as you finished up your presentation. I think you've dealt with it, but anyway, when is the best time to clip the back hair on the stock? You mentioned it there in your presentation.
Yeah, I'd say fairly soon after going in, Vivian, within the first week or two, like, because I seen fellas before trying to clip stock around the Christmas that were in for 6-7 weeks, and they're all dirt and wet, and it's a very messy job. Like, so if you could
you do it, Alan, the day they're going in before they actually go in?
Sometimes now you see going in that day is a bit stressful too. Like, you know, so you sometimes don't want to be doing too many jobs all in the one day, but you could certainly do it in the first week, anyways. I think that's what I'd be aiming to get it done. You know.
Okay. Aisling, I'll revert over to you. Questions coming in there from one of our viewers. This person is feeding 350 kg weanlings. They're getting about a kilo a day. Their house since the 1st of April, sorry, the 1st of November, and they'll stay until, you know, late spring, 1st of April or that. They're in the early stages, but just wondering from your talk, is front loading a better idea of the meal than maybe giving a small bit every day for the whole winter? What do you think?
Yeah, so I suppose the benefits of front loading are that it helps to adapt to that silage. So if you think they're after coming off really high quality grass, particularly this autumn where grass grow to stay growing right through October and November, and even though we do say autumn grass isn't as powerful, it's more an intake thing, it's carrying a lot more water, but it's still a high quality feed. So that front loading helps with that adaptation onto the silage. So that's the main benefit of it in terms of incorporating a higher level of meal. And I suppose if we have cattle maybe pulled off the meal in the last few weeks before going out, to be hoping that they get a little bit more compensatory growth then when they do go back out to grass as well.
Okay, okay. And in that scenario, would 16% protein ration be enough for weanlings, Aisling?
Yeah, it should be, in fairness. Unless there's extremely low protein silage, it should be good enough, yeah.
Okay, okay. Another question on the diet while you're there. So this person has got their silage tested. It's coming back at 72 DMD, which sounds good, I suppose. The protein is 10 and the dry matter is 13.8. I suppose they're a little bit concerned. They were studying your presentation, Aisling, and they feel that the pH might be a little bit low at 4.9, and the lactic acid is only 3.3. Sorry, 3.03. So they're feeding it to dairy beef calves and dairy beef weanlings. So, what kind of ration would that feed require to keep them moving over the winter?
Yeah, so I suppose the big thing, if you are conscious of the silage, I suppose do a back calculation what the cattle are actually eating. So if you're using bales of silage, they're roughly 220 kilos of dry matter. So if you can work out roughly how many bales they're eating or how long it's taken them to get through a bale, that'll give you a good idea if their intakes are on track. So if you have 300 kilo weanlings, they should be eating about, 1 second, now I double check sums, but
take your time.
Yeah, they should be eating about 5.5 kilos of dry matter roughly. So about 1.8% of their body weight or close to 2%. Dairy beef cattle might actually even eat a little bit more. They tend to have slightly higher intakes. So that's a good way of just checking that they're eating enough silage. And I suppose that's my concern and highlighting the palatability issues is that you're watching what they're actually taking in, that you don't assume, right, I have great quality silage, I don't have to do anything else here, that they're going to look after themselves, that you're just keeping an eye on what they're actually consuming, because intake is really the big driver of overall performance. If we have more average silage and we're getting high levels of intake, it'll make up some of that difference as well. So that's the big thing. Do a little back calculation on what they're taking in. But yeah, 16% of ration is more than adequate. With 72 DMD silage, if they're eating plenty of it, they only need maybe 1 kilo or so on it. But that'll give you a good idea. If they're not just eating what they should be, then maybe up a fraction to support overall intake and keep them on track.
And actually, would it be safe to say that dairy bred stock would have probably, I suppose, less stress going into the shed than a weanling from a beef cow, because they're on grass without their mother for most of the summer? So could you factor that in as well, as in the kilo a day probably do them okay?
Yeah, it should, in fairness, yeah. But yeah, just keep an eye on the overall levels of silage you're consuming. If they're eating plenty of it, especially with good quality silage overall, I wouldn't be overly concerned once they're eating plenty.
Okay, we'll just change tack for a minute. So, question here on pre-mineral licks for cows. How long would they need to be introduced pre-calving?
Yeah, ideally, you still want your mineral intake to be up on 6 weeks, ideally, to just build up that overall background of your trace elements. Particularly for your suckler cow, she's got very little supplement probably throughout the year, from when she's been turned out to grass. So ideally, yeah, 6 weeks. I suppose the thing to be conscious of with the mineral buckets is that are all animals accessing them, or have you one cow maybe bullying and taking control of it as well? Particularly those molasses-based ones are very, very palatable. So you could have individual cows overdoing it and some cows not getting access to it.
Okay, so just to keep an eye on that. Okay, Alan, just to give Aisling a minute there. Where can you get your silage tested in the county? This question's coming in from East Mayo.
Yeah, you can get it tested with ourselves, Vivian, in Teagasc. If it's East Mayo, our Clamars office there. Now, I know, just to give a bit of balance, a lot of the feed merchants will do analysis as well too. So if you inquire around there, I'm sure whoever you're buying the meal off might be able to do a silage analysis. But if you can't, drop into the Teagasc office there in Clamars and we'll be able to do it for you.
Okay, very good, very good. Aisling, back to you again. You're very popular tonight. What advice would you have for feeding meal to heifer weanlings? They're about 300 kilos. This person must be working on a farm, and maybe it's on an out farm. They only maybe visit every couple of days. So, sorry, every maybe third day. So they're probably shoving enough silage to do them for a while and then feed meal. So in that case, is it the right thing to feed a nice bit the day they're there, or I suppose how do you best stagger that out?
I'd be conscious of overdoing it because where you're not feeding it every day, you're putting a big starch glut into the rumen, and
Okay.
they're probably not getting the same value out of that meal when they're getting it every 3 days as opposed to getting a little bit every day. So that's something to be conscious of. So you'd be probably limiting it at 3 kilos of max.
In the single
Yeah.
feed.
Yeah.
Okay. Come back to you, Ellen. You mentioned body condition score in your presentation. So just in terms of body condition score, what is the ideal body condition score for a cow to calf down at, let's say, next March?
Yeah, well, that's a spring calf and cow 2.5. Vivian is kind of the ideal. I was going to say it kind of depended when she calved as well, because your autumn, if you have, there'd be some farmers out there that would be still calving cows in the autumn, and she'd want to be in better condition. She'd want to be three plus even, because she has to carry herself over the whole winter as well. So ideally 2.5 is what it is, which allows Vivian then that we would like that cow to be coming in at 3 plus, maybe even 3.5 into the shed this time of year, which means that she can lose a little bit of weight or a little bit of condition, and hopefully get back out to grass fairly quick again and regain it and get cycling.
And just this person's back in again on the silage sample, and the first thing, on average, what does it cost to test a sample?
30, is it 30?
Yeah,
Around 30,
between
35
35 to 40, I think,
yeah,
Alan, wouldn't it?
35 to 38. It's just the exact figure now.
Okay, give
But
ballpark.
just escapes me. Yeah.
And on that, what do they do if they come into the Teagasc office in Clamars with the sample? Do they need to bring in much, or how do they get it into us?
Yeah, it's a bag. They can actually inquire first, and we can have a bag that we can give it to them. So they'd want to take it fresh. Don't take it on a Friday as well. Take it hopefully on a Monday, Tuesday. If it's out of bales, take it from 2 or 3 bales that are freshly opened from the one crop.
Okay.
And just squeeze the air out of the bag and bring it into us. If it's a pit, take again, as you're maybe going back in the benches, take it fresh at the feed face in a couple of different areas. It's like taking a soil sample. Don't take it from the one spot. Take it from 6 different areas. And a reasonable. But the best thing is maybe if they want to call into the office, they're Vivian, and we give them the bag.
Yeah, and the bag is fairly small. We don't need a 50 kg
Oh,
bag
we
of
don't need a
silage,
round bale, but we don't want a small fish either. You need kind of a few little fish bales, you know.
amount. Yeah. Okay. Just one final question for you, Ellen. So a lot of the farmers did fecal sampling for the beef pest scheme, which was there a couple of years ago. That has been replaced now by the beef welfare scheme and so on. Is there merit in farmers doing dung samples now, after maybe going into the shed the last week or two, for liver fluke?
Yeah, they can do it. I think what happened there, Vivian, with the BPS scheme at the time, and it got a bit of bad press maybe, is that there was a deadline, I think, from memory, of the 1st of October that the samples had to be in, which meant that farmers were taking them samples in August and September. And the problem with that is, as I kind of said earlier, like that when an animal ingests the liver fluke, it takes 10 to 12 weeks for that cycle to go through before the adult fluke will be laying eggs. So ideally, the timing is important. So if you're taking it, it should be getting closer to Christmas. And if you do it then, it'll give you a better indication then whether there is a serious fluke issue on your farm. There might be farmers out there that don't dose that much. They might be on very dry farms. And if that's the case, they're wondering whether they dose or not. They could wait till Christmas there and maybe take a dung sample then and talk to their vet then if there is no fluke showing up. Or likewise, if farmers go out there now and they dose 2 weeks after housing and they're wondering should they redose again, they could wait the 8 to 10 weeks and then take a sample again and then see what things are looking like.
Okay, one last question. I forgot it earlier, my apologies. What do you recommend for ringworm and warts, Alan?
Wouldn't be an expert on that one, Vivian, but look, at ringworm, it's kind of a fungus, so it'd be some kind of antifungal treatment. I'd say the best advice there is to talk to his local vet there to get, because I don't think we'd be recommending one product over the other. But I talked to the vet on that.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll hand back to Brendan, and thanks to both Aisling and Alan for their great presentation and advice this evening.
Thanks very much there, Vivian. And we're just about out of time this evening. I'd like to thank our two panelists here this evening, Alan and Aisling. And judging by the questions there, hopefully you enjoyed this evening's webinar. As always, thanks to Vivian as well for facilitating the questions and answers here tonight. But most importantly, thanks to you at home this evening for engaging with us with this webinar on this cold Thursday evening. We hope you found the webinar beneficial. We'll get the recording uploaded to the Teagasc Mayo YouTube channel in the coming days, so keep an eye out for that. All that's left for me to say is that we'll be back here again next Thursday evening for the third episode in this series, where Teagasc Collaborative Farming Specialist Ruth Finnell from Teagasc Kildalton will discuss the various collaborative farming solutions there that are available there to farmers, such as companies, partnerships, land leasing, etc. While Martin Clark there from the IFAC office there in Ballin, County Mayo, will provide us with an update on the whole Parasite system that's in operation there for farmers. So that promises there to be a very interesting webinar next Thursday evening at the usual time of 8 p.m. So do stay tuned and tune in for that. All that's left for me to say again is to say good night to you all, and thank you very much for joining us there this evening, and we'll see you all again next Thursday evening at 8 p.m. Good night, folks, and stay safe.